So let's take a look at our route patterns and translation patterns. We're told to create one set of route patterns and translation patterns where necessary for each country, the US and Netherlands, based on the information in the two tables below. Okay? So let's go ahead and set up the screen here. Let's go ahead and set up our route patterns to begin with. Now obviously with only 3 sites and 2 countries, there's not going to be a lot of savings in potential route pattern savings or route list savings, as we demonstrated there could be with local route groups. There is going to be a few. We do have 2 sites in the US, so I only have to create one set of route patterns, so that will help. So I've got 911. It's going to be in the route partition of dial device for the US. Numbering plan is not selected and not selectable unless I ever have an @ symbol, and then all of a sudden it becomes selectable. Route filter as well, which I haven't created any. Selectable once, or grayed out if I don't have an @ symbol. So then my gateway or route list, note that I don't have any gateways or trunks available. That's because I've put them into route groups. As soon as you assign a gateway to a route group, it's no longer directly selectable from the drop-down within any route pattern. Likewise, if I had not put, let's just take it out for an example. Take out the branch 1 out. Now I can't just take this out and save it. It'll say a route group cannot be empty. So I'll just add, and you can add a gateway to multiple route groups, just like you can add route groups to multiple route lists. Back and find, route group for branch 1. The SIP trunk for corporate headquarters is the only thing that's there. Okay, so if I now go to route pattern, create a route pattern, I can now select that gateway directly, but if I do that, give it as an example. Go, add successful. Okay, it's in the database. If I do that, then likewise, when I go to route group and I try to, let's say, go add it back in, notice it's not even an option anymore. Branch 2 is an option. SIP trunk, which we already have selected, is an option, but I cannot add a gateway or trunk that's already been added to a pattern, can't add it to a route group, and I can't add a gateway or trunk that's already been added to a route group to a pattern. So that works both ways. Back, update this route group properly. Just wanted to demonstrate that condition there. No AJAX, so the page refreshes every single time you click one of these. Okay. Now we'll go back to our route patterns. 911, put it in the proper partition of dial US. It's already pointed to the proper gateway. We need to provide outside dial tone. And urgent priority. Do we need this? Let's take a look once we, first of all, what's urgent priority for? Urgent priority says if there are other potential matches, then as long as this one matches as well, stop looking for other potential matches and go ahead and route the call. Most people use it on emergency services, as well as some other things that we'll take a look at here. In this case, given our route plan, we probably won't need it. It's not a bad idea to turn it on, but we will just go ahead and leave it off just to see if it works just the same. So we've got our 911. We were told earlier to have PSTN access code as well, so we should probably copy this pattern to 9.911. And this just, every time these boxes keep telling me that any FACs or CMCs, save here, it says FACs, authorization codes or FACs will not be activated. If you want to proceed and activate at a later time, that's fine. Click cancel and click FAC checkbox now. Kind of annoying that it says it every time. And it says that any route pattern pointing to any route list automatically resets the route list, which is good because otherwise every time you pointed and updated, you would have to manually go reset that route list. Okay, so we've got two patterns, one for 911, one for 911. Both of them, by the way, both of them have provide outside dial tone. Some people don't choose provide outside dial tone. They do leave it on 9.911. But with 911, they simply say, well, wait a minute, that's not a PSTN access code. That one shouldn't provide outside dial tone. That's just 911. That's just the pattern. Well, here's what provide outside dial tone does. First of all, note that this call classification right here, note that whenever I click provide outside dial tone, watch it, automatically changes from off-net to on-net. If you provide outside dial tone, it changes the call classification to off-net. If I uncheck it, it changes it to on-net. See that? So that's one thing to watch. Call classification, well, traditionally, on-net refers to DNs or patterns that are registered to my CUCM. Off-net is an external route. But obviously, I can change that even for route patterns, which typically point to external routes. What if I was routing to a PBX? You know, this was a migration, and I was creating a route pattern to point to either directly to a gateway or trunk, maybe a trunk to another cluster, and I wanted to consider that on-net. Some would want to consider that off-net. It just depends on CDR records, call detail records. It also depends on other features that we talked about regarding like conferencing, right? When tear down the conference when no on-net conference participants remain. Well, maybe I want to say that if this is going over to a trunk or a PRI to a PBX for a migration or integration, that I want to consider it on-net, and if one of those parties remain on a conference, I want the call to remain up. Or maybe I want to send the call out to the PSTN, so I do want to provide outside dial tone, which changes this to off-net, but I also want to be able to, just to this one particular pattern, you know, maybe a specific partner at, you know, I don't know, 9-614-555-3232. At that law firm, I want them to be considered trusted, so if I leave them on a conference with someone else, it should remain up and I leave. So I create the partition, the pattern, I select provide outside dial tone, which automatically switches it to off-net, and then I go manually change it to on-net so they remain in a conference up state when I go ahead and, as an on-net participant, the last on-net, I go ahead and leave. They're also considered on-net. So there might be reasons why you want to change that. So watch the fact that that changes that. But getting back to 911 and provide outside dial tone. Most people think, well, that's not a PSTN access code of 9. It's just 9 as a part of the service, right? Well, that might be true, but the way CUCM sees it is similar to urgent priority. I don't need to have urgent priority as long as I don't have any other overlapping patterns and there are no more potential matches. If I already am the longest potential match, I don't have to have urgent priority. It's not going to hurt anything, but I don't have to have it. In the same way, provide outside dial tones looks at, from the left, the first or second or third ambiguous number that is dialed. So if I have 911 and 9911, and let's go ahead and create a few more patterns so I can enumerate this example a little better. Let's look at my patterns. So I have 9 as an access code. I'll just go ahead and copy and paste here, although you may not be able to do that in the lab, so be very careful. All of these are going to be under dial device, route list for standard local route group, since this is local. Copy this one and add 1 in there for long distance or national. Same partition. Gateway or pattern now changes to headquarter and then SLRG. And then we were told to set up, so I'll copy this, an international 011 and variable length. Variable length is going to be our bang or exclamation. Again, it's going to point to headquarter and then standard local route group. And then we also need to copy this. We were told early on in the overall guidelines to provide an interdigit timeout. Remember, the exclamation or bang does not match star or hash, so we explicitly match a hash. We'll deal with digit discard in a little bit. So now I've got all my US patterns, and now I can see that this might not, the 9 in just 911 might not be an actual PSTN access code, but watch what happens. Let me bring up my phones, and even though they won't route anywhere yet, I've got one that's still up, so let's go off hook. If I dial 9, I hope you can hear the difference in that tone there. I'll go off hook, hang it up, and then go off hook again and turn it up a little more. Here's the first tone. Now I'm going to press 9. Okay, so you heard the secondary dial tone. I've gone ahead and hung up. Watch if I go ahead and take provide outside dial tone off of 911, as a number of people make the mistake of doing. Now notice what happens. Get rid of some of these. Go off hook, and I press 9, and I have nothing. Now I dial 2. Dialed it too late, interdigit timeout. We'd already changed T302 from another task. Let me try it again. So dial 9, nothing, 2. 2 is when I got my secondary dial tone. Interesting, okay. Let's try another number. What about 9 and then 0? After 0, I got secondary dial tone. What about 9911? Nothing. Okay, after I dialed the second 9, I got secondary dial tone. Remember, all of these have secondary dial tone configured. This is the only one that doesn't. Okay, so let's bring up my phone again. What about dialing 9 and then 1? Still no secondary dial tone. Why? Because it matches this and this. Now I waited too long with T302, interdigit timeout. If I dialed another 1, it would match this and secondary dial tone would never be played. If I dial any other digit other than 1, then all of a sudden 911 is not a potential match, and as long as it wasn't a 0, which wouldn't match anything, 912 through 919 would match this pattern here, and it would play secondary dial tone. So let's try it. 9, 1 still doesn't play secondary dial tone, and now we'll issue a 2. It's on the 2, that third digit. Okay? I'm going to have to turn that T302 timer back up a little bit. That was too long. But it was on the third digit that couldn't match the 911. Okay? So secondary dial tone, works in the same way. It looks for the first non-ambiguous. So if we were told early on the overall guidelines that outside dial tones should be provided as soon as the PSTN prefix trunk code has been dialed, then we need to make sure that we select it even for things like 911. Now that we have it selected for everything, we go back, and as soon as I dial 9, I get the secondary dial tone. Okay? So let's go ahead and add our other patterns. 112. This will be in the dial device Netherlands partition, pointing to standard local route group. Copy that for the 0 dot, the PSTN trunk code of 0, dot 112. Now we'll copy that 0 dot. Let's take a look at our down, take a look at our patterns again. For the next local pattern is left bracket, right bracket, 1 through 8, and then 6 more X's for a total of 7 digits, as we were instructed. Okay, we'll copy this. Here we have 0 is the national access code. Top of the 0 PSTN trunk code, so 0.0, 1 through 2X. Okay, so this comprises the area code. Just so that you're familiar, if you're within the US or not familiar with too many other than your whatever country you're in dialing plans, it typically tends to be that people refer to the first 0 that's essentially their long distance trunk code in the EU. They typically refer to that as part of their area, or probably more properly be known as a geographic code. Okay, so 01 something or 02 something would be what you would say your area code is. However, or actually, it gets even a little more complex because the subscriber portion of the numbers can either be 6 or 7 digits. 7 is what we see here if the area code is a 3-digit area code. If the area code is a 4-digit area code, it essentially eats up that first digit of the subscriber code, and then the subscriber portion of the number, the subscriber code, is 6 digits at that point. Okay, but again, and maybe I haven't mentioned this on this module, I have in others, you won't be required to know individual numbering plans for any one country. Those that are not within North America do not have to know the North American numbering plan, even though that is basis of what we used for this. And if you're from the US or any other country, you won't have to know any other country's numbering plan. Some countries don't even have standardized numbering plans, although more and more are certainly, but they will give you the patterns that they want you to dial. That being said, if they say something like 1 through 8 for that first digit, you better only put 1 through 8. Okay, so everything's within the dial device. Everything is standard local route group here. The Netherlands, we were not told to have any backups, which is good because the digit manipulation would be a bit troublesome. Not impossible, but troublesome. We just did the long distance or national. So now we'll do the international, which is going to be 0 for a PSTN, and then 00 for the international prefix with the bang. And then we're also going to copy that with the trailing hash in order to avoid interdigit timeout, although our interdigit timeout's so rather small at this point. Okay, so here we've got our Netherlands patterns for our one Netherlands site, branch 2, and here we've got our US patterns with local and emergency only accessing standard local route group, long distance and international accessing headquarter and then standard local route group for our corporate headquarter and branch 1 sites. At this point, we have met the requirements. Actually, we've met the requirements for our allowable calls, but we haven't created any translation patterns for blocked calls, so we still need to do that. Now, could I just take, let's say, a pattern like this and copy it and put it in the proper partition for Netherlands block and just block the partition with maybe precedence level exceeded or whatever we wanted to do? Sure, I could do that. I just have to make sure, see, gateway and route list, I have to select that. It's not actually going to route onto the gateway or route list. It's going to be blocked, but I have to at least select that. So that may be coupled with the fact of just kind of keeping them in separate areas is the reason Cisco chooses to use translation patterns. But for our needs, we could create route patterns or translation patterns just the same. We'll go ahead and create translation patterns because, as I've tried to do throughout most of the modules, it's more in keeping with Cisco's documentation. And I've certainly tried to not only heavily reference in the reading resources all of their documentation as it's relevant, unless it's just like a administration guide that says click this and doesn't really provide a ton of useful information. In the same way, I'd like to try to keep everything in line with their guides as much as possible. There will be a few things that we'll differ on, but we'll certainly call those out. So I will create my pattern. Remember, it has to be as specific at least as equally specific, if not more, but equal is just fine, if I want it to actually remain as a restricted equal match and therefore higher ordered partition from the line and therefore actually a blocked call. So here we're going to do this for block Netherlands restricted on the line. We're going to block this pattern, provide outside dial tone. Okay, so this is a interesting, unique bit. What if should I provide outside dial tone here? If I don't, then again, watch this. We'll go ahead and set this for precedence level exceeded. I don't need to deal with calling search spaces because it's just blocking it. Otherwise, I would put a calling search space so that it could wrap around and go back for digit analysis, but here I don't care. Urgent priority, as long as it's equal match, I don't care. I can leave it checked. Translation patterns are checked as urgent priority by default. Before 7.x of CUCM, they were checked and grayed out. You couldn't change them. Now you can change them. Tomorrow we'll get into why. But let's undo. Well, actually, first of all, before I do this, let's over here let's actually come down and open a new tab for dial plans. On my left, I've got my route patterns. On my right, I've got translation patterns. Put that on for just a moment. Back to find list. Okay, so on my right, translation, left, route patterns. Dial plans was not what I wanted. I wanted route plan report. Instead of looking at all patterns, let's look at all patterns where the directory number begins with 0. Okay, so note that I've got two directory numbers that are the same DN, different partitions and different types. One's a route pattern, one's a translation pattern. DN, different partitions, different types. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring up our phone, and let's bring up this one, phone 3. Doesn't really matter. Control phone 3. Currently, they both have provide outside dial tone. When I go off hook in branch 2 and dial 0, I get outside dial tone. Hopefully everyone can hear that. Okay, turn this off. Going back to my translation pattern, if I had unchecked provide outside dial tone thinking, well, wait a minute, this is going to be blocked, right? Blocked. Well, then what's going to happen on my route plan report when I still have those two that are alike, but I want to provide outside dial tone for things like emergency services, local calls, because 0 is a PSTN access code for the Netherlands. What happens when I want to provide that outside dial tone? Let's try. I don't hear it anymore. So it doesn't matter. I can dial something else other than, I have to change that inter-digit timeout. Let's change it to 0 and then 1. Now I hear my inter-digit timeout. But if I would have dialed 0, 0, it's still non-ambiguous. Sorry, it's still ambiguous. Second 0. Now the third 0, I get outside dial tone because of my patterns here. These say 0, 0, but that next digit cannot be a 0. Right? So again.
So Mark, is that because the translation has a urgent priority, therefore comparative to the two, it's going to take precedence?
No. So urgent priority, I'll uncheck that, save it twice because it didn't update successful. So if we remember,
or was that an order of operations as far as partition preference because of the line device calling search space? As far as specifically why we're not providing dial tone.
Right, okay. So let's take a look at a branch 2 phone. I'll answer that with example. So calling search space is Netherlands device. And let me not even open up the translation or the route pattern. Let me just go directly to the dial plan installer, route plan report, searching for anything with a 0. So this pattern is in dial device, which is configured here. Then on the line, I've got the calling search space for, restricted. And that defined as the pattern here. So if I go through, provide outside dial tones off, urgent priority is off, right? So, buzz. Go. So what would happen if I just, first of all, now that I unselected urgent priority, good engineers don't change more than one thing at a time testing. So let's just test that again. Okay, still 0, nothing. Second 0, nothing. 1. Now I don't hear secondary dial tone there either. That's interesting. 0. Oh, that's because it could have been the long distance. So 0, 0, 0 is non-ambiguous. Okay, so urgent priority didn't change it from not working. Let's switch the order of these calling search spaces. I'll put the device on the directory number or the line. And back to configure device. And I'll change this device CSS to the actual line ones. Started over here. So this phone, restarting here. It actually is restarting in front of me. Oh,
You
you know what?
updated
I that
3001. You're
on.
looking at 3002.
Yep, thanks. That's exactly correct. Okay, so now let's try the same thing. Let me turn the volume. 0, nothing. Second 0, nothing. Third 0. Now I get it. So it doesn't matter about the order. It doesn't matter about the, let me go back to my route plan report to show these. It doesn't matter that the order was this first, this second. Doesn't matter if that was first or second, second or first. It doesn't matter that one blocks, one routes. It doesn't matter that one's urgent priority and the other is not urgent priority. The only thing that matters so far, because we haven't gotten to the end of the string, all we're doing with secondary dial tone is looking from the left over to the right to see if this one, erase all this, if urgent priority is checked here, checked here, checked here, checked here, checked here, but not, Boolean not checked here, okay? Maybe we'll just X that out. Then we're looking for the first non-ambiguous number from the left to the right, which is how we dial. So 0 matches everything, and this one says don't play outside dial tone, so we cannot yet play it because one person isn't agreeing. It's kind of like a unanimous vote. Everyone has to be in unanimity.
Agreement.
So if I dial 0, there's still some ambiguity. First of all, this pattern cannot even be considered anymore. What was that there? 0, 1, that cannot be considered. This one could be considered. This one, that was a 0, 0, right? So this could be considered, and this could be considered, but this one still says don't play it. So we still have one that says don't play it. If the next digit is a 1 or 2, if we basically go all the way to the end, this pattern will never play outside dial tone because it's equal to this pattern regardless of whether they route or not. Regardless of whether one blocks, one routes, which one's on top or not, they both are potential matches until we get to the end, and then this one becomes more specific, but we've already exhausted the numbers, so we go ahead and route the call before we ever play secondary dial tone. So that's the reason this one would never route it, even if it was on top. Okay? It's only if we had dialed 0, 0, there was still the ambiguity, and then all of a sudden we dial a third 0, that's where these work. If we had dialed 0, 0, 1, then all of a sudden this is the only match, and it has outside dial tone.
So
Try this.
it's back to the Boolean analogy. There's a Boolean and unless everybody wants to play nice in the sandbox, we don't get dial tone.
That's correct. That's exactly a good way to look at it, like a class map with match all or a Boolean and, unless everyone is in agreement that we need to play outside dial tone, everyone that is a potential match, if anyone's not, then we don't play it. So if I do 0, 1, by the time I hit that second, see the display, do it again, display 0, nothing, and then 1. That's where we get that second dial
And in the
tone.
same vein, if you change that translation pattern to 0.1, again, it would kind of screw up the party, and you wouldn't get it until you hit the third character. Okay.
I change this to 0, 1. This is the last bit here now.
Then we wouldn't get one until we decide to route at the end.
0, 1, dialed it. Now 1. The second one, we still don't get it. 2.
And then
Now
we
we've
would
got a
time out,
match.
and then the call would eventually route.
Right. And what we just saw there was the call actually did route to that gateway, but there's no inbound dial peer, so we got another dial tone, but that was actually from the router, if you could hear that. Router inbound iOS, we didn't have an inbound dial peer, so anyway. Okay. So we do want provide outside dial tone. Urgent priority, it doesn't hurt to leave it on for translation patterns. Now we're back. 0, we get instant dial tone as soon as we dial 0. Let me change this T302. 5 seconds. Let's bring it back up to 1,000 milliseconds or 10 seconds. Let's go back to the phone configuration, change these back to the proper device on device. Netherlands, and then restricted. 3001 should be unrestricted. 3002 should have been restricted. Very briefly, that updated successfully. Phone 2, 3002, device on device. Check the DN, CSS, good, we've got restricted. Okay, we're done with the device pages. We probably should have reset that device. Yeah. Okay, that's resetting. And we'll go back to our translation patterns that do restrictions. And we'll also bring up our route patterns, another tab, so that we can just quickly copy off of those. So that was our long distance. National. We need now our copy, since it's going to be in the same checkboxes, same partition, same block, and we'll replace the pattern with what we saw there in the route pattern. Now, if I just had this one for international, would that stop me from routing the call? It would if I let the interdigit timeout take over, but as long as the user pressed the hash, this would no longer match because the bang or exclamation does not match a star, asterisk, or a hash. Okay, so I do have to have a duplicate 0.001 hash in the restricted with a block in order to block both, because those are technically two different patterns. Okay, so I've got those provisioned. Now I need to add a new one. That was long distance international. Actually, you know what? Let me take a look at my class of service. Flash should allow for, okay, so one of them only allowed for internal and emergency, so I need to block local as well. So I actually needed one more translation. Back, and I'll copy one of these. Pattern with the same exact pattern as my local Netherlands pattern. Now I've taken care of the Netherlands. Now I'll go ahead and copy this and change the partition to US line restricted for my US numbers. Top here. Copy this with the hash. One of the nice things, if your browser already does it, I can just do 9 dash and I can see, or dot rather, I can see the patterns that I've already created pre-populating. Can't be sure that the lab would do that, which is why I was demonstrating copying and pasting from your route patterns. That was our long distance. We did our, let's see, I know we did our long distance in international, 9011. It looks like my 9.011 bang hash either didn't take or I forgot to hit copy, one of the two, both of which are cool. Always a good idea to go back and check. So I've got my international, my long distance, local, okay, so we've got long distance, local. I think I forgot to hit copy again. That mistake all the time. I've certainly seen students make that mistake. Definitely go back and check your work. Okay, international, long distance, local, local, long distance, international for the two countries. Those are our restricteds. Now, remember, we were told to create unrestricted CSSs that just pointed to the partitions of internal. We don't actually need to create any sort of blocking or allowing partition or patterns. We already did the allowing patterns. Those were our route patterns, and those go on the devices. And based on the calling search spaces we already set up, these partitions and therefore these patterns are already now routable from the actual devices, respective devices. And these translation patterns, based on the partitions they're in, based on the CSSs we already set up and assigned to the lines of the phones, should already be essentially in effect. So for our gateway, that's at least our, and I think that's what we get to next is, well, calling and called party transformation and then gateways. For our gateways that are MGCP, they should work if we're doing our digit strip properly, but we haven't got into any sort of digit strip yet. So we've now met the requirements for this task, creating translation patterns for blocking on the line and our route patterns being our allowable dialable patterns on the device. So we'll test those in a moment. Once we do our transformation, set up our dial peers where necessary,